everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I've not filmed a video in what feels like a really long time, so I'm really excited to finally film my best books of 2022. I've managed to narrow it down to 12 books this year. I did try and do 10, but it felt like it wasn't enough. And I feel like this is also a bit of a weird list because some of the 5 stars that I had this year aren't in this list, and some of the 4 stars that I had have gone on this list. So I don't know what that says about my ratings or whether certain books have just stuck with me more than others, but I was just like looking through my list and yeah, some of the 4-star ones just seem to like stand out as better books to me. I don't know why. Or maybe it's to do with a book having like a certain memory and me just like really enjoying the reading experience compared to some of the other books that I had. I don't know. So I'm not going to do this in any particular order, I don't think, because I just found it way too hard to categorise them, so I'm just going to sort of pick them at random. So the first book that I want to talk about is one that I read in February of this year, and it was 3 Hours by Rosamund Lupton, and this is probably one of the best thrillers that I've ever read. It's kind of like a literary thriller and it's set in a school, and basically we're following a range of different characters as they go through this like terrorist attack at the school. This book was so well written, it was so tense and suspenseful. The ending of this book blew me away. I was so like shocked, I didn't expect anything that was going to happen. And I've also just realised that I did put some like couple of tabs in here, so I'm gonna have to like go through this book I think and put some of my actual like nice tabs in there. Very atmospheric, emotional, just like well researched, and I really enjoyed it. It was a 5-star read, and I think my dad read it as well and he also really enjoyed it. So I think this is a really good book for people that want to read more of a well-written thriller, more of like a literary thriller, which still feels very gripping and captivating. The next book on this list is one of those weird additions that I didn't expect to be here until I was like looking at all the books that I read this year, and that was The Ruins by Scott Smith. Now, I think I rated this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is a horror survival book which follows a group of friends who've gone on this holiday in Mexico. One of the group's brothers goes missing, so they all decide to go into the Mexican jungle to try and find this guy, and they end up in a very sticky situation where they're trapped on this hill, and there's a tribe surrounding the hill who won't let them leave, and they don't know why, they can't communicate with them, and they have to basically try and survive, wait it out. It felt longer than it was, but in a really good way. So it was very detailed, kind of overwritten almost, but it helped you feel kind of trapped and helpless. And it felt like it matched the characters and how they were just waiting and waiting for somebody to come and save them. It looks a lot into like the group dynamics and how that shifts. It also has a ton of gross body horror in this book, which made me feel really sick. And I genuinely always looked forward to picking this book back up, which is a really good sign for me because I often get into like reading slumps or I often get a bit bored of a book, but this one had me hooked the whole time. The only reason I didn't give it a 5-star was because the nature of the horror wasn't like the scariest thing in the world to me, but now I think about that, that didn't really matter. I still had a really good time with it. I would probably give it like a 5-star now just for how I felt reading it. The ending was really good. It feels a lot like a movie. I think there is a film version as well. So now I'm not sure where I stand on the 4.5 or 5-star thing, but either way, this book has got me really excited to read this author's other stuff. This is probably one of the few horror novels that I've read this year. I've read quite a lot of short novellas and like short stories, but this one is probably one of my favourite horror novels that I've ever read, and I would definitely recommend it if you can cope with the like gory body horror stuff. The next book, you could probably have predicted that this would make it onto the list, and that is What Lies Between Us by John Mars. I did do a reading vlog where I read 4 of his books, and this was my definite favourite of the 4 that I read. I gave this one a 5-star. This book is about a mother and daughter, and they live in the same house, but they've obviously got this very troubled relationship. They don't like each other very much, and we basically flash back and forth to figure out what happened with these two and what made their relationship so toxic, and all the complicated stuff that happened to make this situation as it is, where they live together but in a very bizarre set of circumstances where the mum is kind of held prisoner in the house. I was absolutely obsessed with this book when I was reading it. I could not stop reading. It was so dark, very mysterious. I could not wait to see what was going to happen. It kept just getting darker and darker as the book went on, and so many things were happening that I just could not believe. And it's definitely one of the best thrillers that I've ever read, just because of how fast paced it was. It has all of those like dark and disturbing elements that I really enjoy in my thriller books. It also felt like a really deep dive into these characters and their history, so you felt a lot of empathy for both sides, even though they'd both done really horrible things to each other and continued to do horrible things. But you could totally see why this relationship was how it was, and I just was obsessed. If you want to see my more like in-depth thoughts about it from when I actually read it, I will link that reading vlog down below, so you can go over there if you want to see more. If you like books that are written by like Lisa Jewell, Alice Feeney, if you've read any other John Marrs books, then you should definitely read this one. I thought it was amazing. Next one is another odd one, because when I first finished this book I gave it a 3-star, I think, and then I bumped it up to like a 4.5 afterwards, and for some reason it has still made it into my like best books of the year, and that was Severance by Ling Ma. I think the reason why I rated this book a bit lower at first was because I was expecting something a bit different. The back of this book makes out that this is very satirical, and it's about a woman who works in an office in like a corporate job, and the world is basically falling apart around her. There's a huge pandemic and she continues to just carry on as normal. That is only a tiny sliver of this book, and although that is done in a really interesting way, this book has a whole lot more in it. So in this book we're following a woman called Candice, who was born in China and moved over to America when she was about 10, I think. It talks a lot about her identity, her relationship with her parents, her boyfriend, how she's like fallen into this job that she works in. It's just a lot about our main character in general, and then it also has this backdrop of there's this massive pandemic, which is also really scary because this book came out before COVID, and a lot of it rings very true to what happened with COVID-19. And it's just about her like carrying on as normal because it's just what she's used to. She loves routine. But then we also get to see Candice in a few months' time when she's living with this like group trying to survive in the pandemic after everything's like completely gone to shit, and that's quite scary as well. So it's got a lot of different elements in it, and I'd listened to a podcast on this book, which is the only time I've ever done that, and it made me realise just how much stuff is like jam-packed in this book. It's fairly short, I think it's just less than 300 pages, but there's so much to talk about. This would be a really good book club book, I think, and I definitely think I want to reread this someday now that I know what to expect going into it. I think the blurb kind of missells it a bit and makes it seem like it's going to be some action-packed apocalyptic book, but it's not really, but it's still really good in its own merit. So this one made it onto this list, I think, because of how much was in it, how much it made me think, and just how engrossed in this world I was. And even when I finished this book I still wanted to learn more. I think I rated this like 4.5 in the end, but I think it is one that I will definitely reread someday, and it might even be like a 5-star on a second read. I would recommend this if you like more contemporary stuff, but it also has that post-apocalyptic element in it that keeps it really interesting as well. The next book on this list is one that I read I think just after Severance or just before, and that is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. This book is set in Southern America in Ohio, and we're following just a weird cast of characters who are all a bit messed up and all a bit disturbed. They're all kind of loosely connected, and we're following all these characters over a number of years. There's a lot of grossness in this book. Part of it made me feel genuinely sick. I loved how all of these characters were fully fleshed out just in a couple of chapters. There was so much dark, disturbing elements, but that again is something that I really enjoy in a book, and I thought that this book was just flawless by the end of it. I loved how tense it got towards the end as everything was reaching this big climax, and I was genuinely scared for some of the characters and what was going to happen to them. And yeah, this is another one where I really want to read more from this author. I think I want to read Knock 'em Stiff, which I think is a short story collection or like a short novella. I'm not even sure if it's a real place where he actually set this book in these towns, but he made the places just feel so icky and creepy, and everyone that you meet is so flawed, but there's something just so compelling about it where I just couldn't stop reading. Even though these people were gross, they were all horrible, but I just wanted to learn more about what was going to happen. I gave this one 5 stars because I had nothing bad to say about it, and I still don't. This next book is another one that I read in this same time period. I think in May I had loads of 5-star reads, and this one is Hostage by Claire McIntosh. I've read a few of Claire Mackintosh's books before and I think I also gave them 5 stars. This one I was just obsessed with. It's about this woman who's a flight attendant and she's on a non-stop flight from London to Sydney, I think, and then she gets this note while she's on the plane that says, you need to help me get into the cockpit where the pilot is or I'm going to do something to your daughter. So she now has this like huge moral dilemma. Does she take this risk and allow this plane to get hijacked to save her own family? It was so scary and so tense. There were so many plot twists. It was fast paced. It felt really well researched. I thought the epilogue was probably one of my favourite epilogues for a thriller that I've ever read. I love books that put you in a situation where you have to think like, what would you do in that situation? I feel like this will make a really good film because there's so much action in it. I highly recommend this one if you like fast paced thrillers, short chapters, things like that, but also really good characters that you can empathise with. I also read this on a plane while I was going on holiday, so it made this whole experience feel even more terrifying, and it was just such a good time. Easy 5-star, and I will definitely continue to read pretty much everything that Claire Mackintosh brings out. The next book on this list I've recently talked about on my channel quite a lot, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I annotated this book quite a lot with my new nice sticky tabs, and I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 overall. It feels like one of those books that's going to stick with me just because of how much I enjoyed the reading experience, and it might be one that I revisit in the future. So this is about a group of students in this elite college, and they all study classics. They're very snobbish and exclusive, and our main character Richard somehow gets like involved in this group. They all get taught by this professor who's quite like charismatic and mysterious, and this group start pushing a lot of moral boundaries. And even though it's quite clear like early on in the book what's going to happen, I won't say it just in case, but you're kind of reading why this thing has happened and how they're gonna move on from it. I really loved the writing in this book. There was such beautiful imagery. This school and the place where they live just felt so atmospheric. This is a book where there's a lot of like vibes and atmosphere in it, and you can easily get sucked into this world and just enjoy being in it, even though there's not a lot of plot to this book. Even with the characters, they feel a bit like distant from the reader, but there was something so like, I don't know, hypnotising or like mesmerising about this book where I just could not stop reading it. Although it took me quite a while to read it, it's one where I enjoyed being in this world. I wanted it to keep going even though it's like 600 pages. I didn't want it to end. I could have read a sequel, and I loved the process of annotating this book and tabbing it. So I really just liked this whole experience of reading. I think it's the first book where I've ever read it as like intensely as this, and I just had a really good time reading it. So this is like one of my favourite experiences of reading that I've had this year, and ever since this book I've tried to like annotate a few more and it's just not worked. Like they've just not fitted with it. So I need to find some other books like this, or I might just read some more Donna Tartt books, because this was just so fun, and I definitely recommend this if you like dark academia or you want to get into dark academia. The next book is another horror story, and it is the first manga that I've ever read, which was Uzumaki by Junji Ito. Just move that there. This is a book about a town which has become possessed by spirals. It feels like an episodic kind of story, and it was genuinely terrifying. It featured so many different ways in which a spiral could be scary, and I never thought that I would be scared by spirals, but this author is so clever and so twisted to be able to design some of the things that he did. I knew that when I was flipping the pages that there would often be like a jump scare image, so gruesome and disturbing. There's so much body horror and just like gross stuff going on in this book, but I read it all in one sitting in one afternoon. It's very quick and easy to read. I think I gave this book a 4.5 overall because I thought the ending dipped a little bit, but this book has definitely stuck with me regardless. I definitely want to read more from Junji Ito, and I found that I really enjoyed the process of reading manga just because it felt so quick, and this is definitely one that I would recommend if you are into like gross horror, but just be warned that some of the images will be ingrained in your brain and scar you for life. Another one of my favourite thrillers from this year is No Exit by Taylor Adams. This book I read in January when it was cold, it was snowy, and that was just the perfect time to read it. I would definitely say read this book in winter. It is set during a snowstorm, and our main character Darby has pulled up on this rest stop because I think her car was like at risk of getting snowed in or something, and she thinks that she sees a girl trapped in a cage in the back of somebody's van. So she knows that somebody in this rest stop has kidnapped a girl and they're all stuck there, and it's about her trying to figure out who has kidnapped this girl, who this girl is. And this book was flawless. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was so action-packed and fast-paced. It's now a film, but it reads like a film as well. I really loved Darby as our main character. I loved her determination and her confidence. The villains in this book were really scary. There was so much tension. I just didn't know what was going to come next. It has some really sinister elements to it, and the ending, oh my god. The stress that this book gave me as it was getting to the end, because it just kept going and going and going, getting worse and worse, and I just could not wait for Darby to like get out of the situation. And the way that this book ended felt so shocking. I loved it, and yeah, I just felt so like exhilarated after reading this book. The stakes felt really high and I just loved everything about it. So I think if you want to read this book, definitely read it like around this time, or like January, February, and it will definitely get you out of a reading slump, because you just will not be able to stop reading this book. The most recent book that I read that has made it onto this list is Come Closer by Sarah Gran. This is my sister's copy, which I've spilt milkshake on. Well, I didn't spill it, my cats did. So unfortunately it's a little bit wrinkled here. Tara, if you're watching this video, I will buy you a new copy. So this book is about a woman who starts hearing strange noises in her apartment. She starts having weird dreams, and she starts getting all these weird thoughts which she wouldn't normally have. The temptation to do things that are typically immoral and are just not like her at all. And she starts wondering if maybe she's possessed by something, or if she's mentally ill. And this book is so short. I read it in one sitting in an afternoon. It only took me a couple of hours and I just loved it. It's scary, it's fun, it's interesting. It's only 160 pages. It packs a real punch. I loved the ending. I just loved everything about it. This one is a 5-star read for me. I'm so happy about it because the last few books that I've read haven't been my favourites. So I was really glad to have this one and just remind me why I love a short horror story. And because I've read quite a lot of books that have been about possession recently, not really knowing that it was about possession, but a lot of books have featured like the devil, possession, that sort of thing. And this is the scariest one I've read for me personally, just because of how kind of realistic it felt. And I think that's what made this book so scary for me, was that it felt very real and it could just kind of happen to anyone. I know that I love a book when I managed to read it like all in one go. I just did not want to put this book down. I also loved the dark humour of this book as well. I thought it was funny. There wasn't a ton of like terrifying horror stuff in it. There was just this foreboding sense of dread and just a creepiness to it that I was just obsessed with. So we've got 2 books left, and I think they are my top 2 books of the year. I genuinely cannot decide which one I preferred. They're very different. So I'll just start with the one that I read most recently, which is Notes on an Execution by Danica Kafka. This book is about a serial killer who's on death row, and he's on the last 24 hours of his life before he's going to be executed. And then we follow 3 different women's perspectives who were somehow involved in this guy's life. It's just such an interesting concept to learn about this serial killer through the women in his life. It was so well written, so well researched, and it really just made me think. I have talked about this, I think, in another video, but this book really made me reflect on how I view true crime. And as somebody who's really interested in true crime, I often binge listen to podcasts. I've always got like a video on in the background. I've since unsubscribed to I think every true crime YouTuber that I used to watch. It's made me really change my mind on people profiting from telling stories about true crime, pumping out content that is not very well researched, not very respectful to the victim or their families, also assuming a lot of things about the case when they weren't there. They don't actually know about like the police investigation and things like that, and about the victims' lives, and just being overly familiar with things which are just like totally inappropriate to be over familiar with. So this book really delves into the romanticisation of serial killers, society's obsession with learning about why they've done it, and putting the focus back on the people who they've hurt. So I loved the message of this book. I love that it's made me like actually change something in my real life. It also talks about the death penalty, and is that useful to anybody? Is it a deterrent in itself, or is it more for the public's benefit? I really want to have a copy of this book so that I can annotate it, because this definitely is one that I feel like I could have a lot of like things to say about it. It was really well written. It had a lot of like gorgeous imagery in there. I really loved all the characters. I could totally empathise with everybody in the book. I cried on 2 occasions, 2 very conflicting things I cried at. So I feel like this book just really spoke to me, and I just got it and I loved it, and I would highly recommend it if you like crime fiction. I think you'd really enjoy this book. It's definitely one that has a lot packed into it and a lot to think about. And the last book that I'm going to talk about is one of the first books that I read in 2022. Again, I read this for a reading vlog, so I will try and link the video down below so you can see my full reaction. But this book is We Need to Do Something by Max Booth III. This book is one of my favourites of all time, I think. It's a short horror novella about a family who gets stuck in a bathroom together during a hurricane, I think, or a tornado. This book is exactly the kind of horror that I love. There's some really toxic family dynamics in there. There's this horrible freak weather thing, which is something that really scares me. The thought of seeing a tornado in real life, ew, I couldn't cope. If England was known for its tornadoes, I just could not. It also has an element of survival in it because the family are waiting for somebody to come and rescue them because they can't get out of this bathroom. It was just a perfect book for me. There's something that happens in this book which has genuinely scarred me forever, and then the ending of this book, just the end page, the last page, oh my god, so terrifying. This is one of my favourite books ever. I think if I had to recommend one horror book to anybody, it will be this one. This is just everything that I'm scared of wrapped up into one, and I just loved everything about it. So it's definitely a toss-up between this book and Notes on an Execution for my top favourite book of the year, but as I said, they're very different. But overall, all the books in this video, so good. I did have a fair few other 5-star, 4.5-star books that I would have put in as honorary mentions, but for some reason I was just able to discount them from my favourites, even though some of them were 5 stars, which is a bit weird. But yeah, that is everything I have to talk about in today's video. I will also be filming a worst/most disappointing books of the year. I've had so much fun filming videos this year, and I don't do it as much as I like to because of my job and things like that. So it's really nice to see all your comments and see people subscribe. It just makes my day. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your favourite books of the year have been because I love hearing your recommendations. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I hopefully will see you in my next video. Bye!